Welcome to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and this podcast is your guide to start creating a lifestyle by design. From entrepreneurship, money and finance, taxes and residencies, and everything in between, this show highlights the nuances of a true global citizen lifestyle. Let's dive in. Kerstin, welcome to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. I'm so looking forward to diving into all things language learning, and of course, entrepreneurship today. But before we dive in, please share with us a little bit more about your story, your journey, where you started, and how you got to where you are today.
It's such a big question. Hello. I'm going to mention languages and I'm going to mention my business. And if I'm going to look at languages, then if you're asking where I started, there almost is no start date. I feel like I've always been fascinated by languages, dialects, where I come from. I'm born in Germany. I grew up speaking German. And in my family, we speak a very strong dialect called Moselfränkisch, which is quite different to German. So I think I've always been aware that there's different ways that people can communicate with each other and different meanings even between which language you choose. I've always been fascinated by that. Languages were sort of my subject that I was into at school. Loved learning English. And then I moved to the UK when I was about 20, and just sort of kept languages in my full-time education. I've got a translation master's. I've got some other whatever language degree I have. That's been also for over a decade now. Pretty much my main business focus has been on language learning. And I love just the bigger benefits of learning languages, not just opening up new steps into a different world, not just connecting to other people, traveling, boosting your career, but also I love it so much when people do something that they really want to do, without talking themselves out of it, and being active as a language coach allows me to help them with that. So that's sort of the language side, which has always been into it, really. And the entrepreneurship side, I used to work in universities in the UK as a recruitment officer. So I used to travel the world to represent universities and go to all these education fairs and talk to all these 19-year-olds about doing accounting at our university and what their future life could be like. And when that kind of went south, I kind of almost went back to my roots, and I thought, well, what can I do? So I started my business out of need, and I thought, well, one thing that I have built up is this huge library of things I want to tell people that have been telling me for the last 10 years that languages are hard and the English don't do languages, and all these different, I'm going to call them excuses, all these different reasons why they can't. And I just wanted to address all that, and that's really where my business started. Really, it was, listen, like, number one, I can teach you a language, no problem. Number two, I've got something to say to you about that as well. And that's how it grew. That's how I started my podcast. That's how I started my blog, and how I built everything I've built now. Really, that's a philosophy that I kind of bring into it.
What a great story. Okay, I love that you touched on both the entrepreneurship and then, of course, the language learning side of things. We're going to dive into both of those a little bit deeper, but you said something very interesting there that I want to chat about for a second, and I would love your opinion on this. And I'm going to share from my perspective what it has looked like for me. Definitely no language expert, but I did grow up in Canada. And one interesting thing that you said was that the English don't do languages. And
Mm.
of course, Canada is technically a bilingual country, which I have everyone when I travel, when I'm outside of Canada, everyone will ask me, do you speak French? And I'm like, honestly, most people don't in Canada, unless you live in Quebec. Most people are not speaking any sort of French. And it's so interesting because I didn't really realize how many other people and countries speak second and third languages, and it's just such a normal everyday thing for many people in that country
Mhm.
to speak
Mhm.
additional languages because in Western countries, I find from my perspective, where English is the native language, you don't really usually need another language. And so when I moved to China, I realized, there's people who are speaking Russian and Chinese and English and French and Spanish. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have never been exposed to this. And now, even being in Latin America for the last almost 2 years and traveling to almost all of the countries in Latin America, it's so interesting to see that most people speak a minimum of two, maybe three languages. And I find two to three is pretty standard. Of course, not for everybody. And there's a lot of factors on who that applies to. But I found it really interesting that coming from a Canada and America, potentially a UK, Australia, English is just that's what it is. And if you speak one additional language, it's like, oh my gosh, wow. Whereas the rest of the world, it's not like that at all.
Yeah, I love the way that you've put that, especially observing it as a Canadian, 'cause it's almost like in English-speaking countries, people think English is the language, when actually
Yes.
English is a language.
Yes.
It's so
Exactly.
true, and I do think, and that's sort of when I say, like, there's a real feeling of, like, oh, I often hear, "We English, we are bad at languages," and it's "we English" because I live in England, not because the English are particularly egregious here. So it's "we are bad at languages." Not true, but, the school system doesn't exactly prioritize them, so it's not like you're at the cutting edge of language teaching.
So interesting that you bring that up because when I was living in Canada, I did find, English is like the language, the only language, and it is an important language, but it's definitely not the only language. And there was not enough emphasis really put on languages in education. And that's
Mhm.
why, I believe like if I were to ever have a child, I would want to teach them outside of the traditional education system because there's so many things, not only languages, but so many things that are so important that I just didn't learn, and so many completely useless things that I don't remember now that took up so much time and headspace for years and decades on end that were just nowhere near as useful, unfortunately, as understanding a language. I think now I realize that of course it's different because I live a very global lifestyle and very different from a lot of those that I went to school with, but as I'm sure you do as well. But I realize that if I had have had none of that and only languages, I would be so much more better off now. But you live and you learn, and we can only work with what we have. And so now I have been learning Spanish for not too long, quite honestly, less than a year. And it's been a journey because I would not say, and I'm sure you'll have an interesting take on this that I would love to hear. I'm not a natural language learner. My partner speaks three languages, so English, Spanish, and Mandarin fluently, no problem, and pick them up in less than a year. And I've been immersed in Spanish for 2 years now, and I'm still struggling with, oh my gosh, the conjugations and the grammar. And I'm just like, what is this? It's so much more difficult than English with all these conjugations. So I would say I'm not so much a natural language learner, but it has been easier being immersed in the culture and especially hearing the accent and the way of speaking, where if I don't know a word, I can guess how it's pronounced and more likely than not have a close pronunciation to what it actually is just because of the immersion. So I'm curious from the expert, what are some language learning tips, tricks, hacks? A lot of the audience are wanting to or currently learning one or potentially multiple languages. So please share with us some of your secrets.
My secrets, eh? Um, this is fascinating to me because one thing that happens when I tell people that I work with languages and that I'm a language learning coach and I help people learn languages, is that almost without fail, this is fascinating. I really often hear a story similar to yours, which is a story of missed opportunities. Do you know what I mean? hmm It really brings up something in people. There's a lot of people almost have a regret, right? Have a feeling of shortfall in languages. And I think that's partly what translates into this a feeling that if you're starting as an adult, you're already behind. Right? You've already failed. You've got no chance of really getting there. And other people can do this better. And you're not, like you say, you're not a natural language learner. I hear that a lot. Um, I would argue that I'm not a natural language learner. I'm naturally into it, apparently. And but oh my god, French is the hardest. I've learned French for like 30 years, and the reason I persist with French, I tell you this, is because I've already done so much work. Like I did my degree in French because I was like, well, I've done all of this work now. I'm not giving this up now. This was so hard. And now I can totally switch into French and have a conversation with you at any point. Not particularly well, but it's good enough. It's what many people would say is fluent. It sounds good. And but it's never been the love, right? So I think there is a difference between mm, feeling great about what it is that you are learning and I guess being great at what it is that you are learning. And if you're asking me, one of my personal secrets, I guess, is I quite enjoy being bad at it. Like, I don't mind. I don't mind. I have been learning Welsh for 9 years, and there is no way I was any good at the start. In fact, I quite like sometimes just smashing myself into it and having these conversations, etc. But the benefit that I get from that is similar to what you're saying, is that around me, I have all this opportunity to practice. And when you're open to practice and you're actually going out and giving it a go in full knowledge and acceptance that you are no good at this, but you're still doing it, that's where the huge learning experience comes. And that's where the huge learning ability comes because languages, it's almost, I feel like it's a particular balance that you require for learning a language between being able to actually practice the skill, which is knowing the words from memory, pronouncing them correctly, having the right tone, having the right accent, having the right phrases at easy disposal so you can communicate quickly. That's all skill. And then the other side of it, which is this theory, which you do need, right? You need to understand some basic grammar patterns or concepts so that you can put the words together in a way that makes sense and expresses what you are trying to express. And for many people, they say, oh, I want to learn a language like a child. There is a level of frustration here if you do approach it like a child. I'm not the biggest fan of that approach at all because you're not a child, you're an adult. Your brain can understand concepts and rules in a way that children's brains are not ready to. And also, you want to express more complex concepts and ideas at a completely different level, right? So, with languages, I think accepting that your skill level might be low, even when your understanding of theory or concept is high, really helps, right? And that is a sense of self, almost compassion, self acceptance that we want in there. That is the mindset piece of language learning. And then from a practical point of view, I strongly advocate for practicing all four what I call the core skills. And they are listening, reading, speaking, and writing. It's not rocket science, is it? It's not particularly hard. And then to really work with when I work with my clients, we work on being clear about your goals, allowing yourself the kind of big vision and really letting yourself have that and enjoy it, but then getting practical and tracking what you're doing in the most relaxed hands-off way, but just something that keeps you going, making sure you've got some variety in what you're learning, getting your balance of resources right, and regularly checking in with yourself and assessing where you are with your progress. So it's, in a way, it's not different to how you would do other things that are really hard. uh, and the other point that I really want to make here is that I do think it takes time. When you said, "Oh, my partner," because you mentioned earlier your partner is Mexican, right? So a native Spanish speaker. Is that correct? Okay. You said right? I'm double checking everything. Okay, so he speaks English and he speaks Spanish. Yes, and Mandarin. And then you said, oh, he learned them all in 12 months, but he didn't learn Spanish in 12 months if it's his native language, right? Didn't learn English probably in 12 months because that's around you. If you're a non-native English speaker, but you're in Mexico, it'll be around you. So maybe Mandarin?
Well, actually, so for him, yeah, Mandarin he studied about 12 months in a university. And
Mm-hmm.
then English, he actually moved to China to teach a specific
To teach.
child
Mm-hmm.
English, but he didn't speak English. So he was learning English with the child that he was supposed to be teaching English. And the child spoke Mandarin, and he didn't speak Mandarin, and the child spoke no Spanish, and he only spoke Spanish.
Okay.
So
So we are talking about somebody who just dedicated essentially full time an entire year to this, right?
I mean, he kind of had to
No
survive.
wonder that there would be great progress. My point being, I think one of the biggest secret ingredients that nobody, I can't sell anybody. Sorry, I'd be so rich. Oh my god, it'd be so great. Is time. It's like the time and patience aspect and dedication. And unfortunately, I think there are great programs out there that really get you to a very high level in 3 months, 4 months, like really get you to where you want to be. I think those are amazing, especially if you've got a trip coming up. However, when you look at how memory works and how long-term memory works, you do want to, if you want to, really what I call relaxed and reliable fluency. So something that doesn't fade so quickly, the same way that I can drop into French now, without too much of a big switch in my brain. And actually, with Welsh, it's getting there as well. You need long-term memory, like you need it in your long-term memory, and that doesn't quite come in 3 months. That's why years of your life where you don't have to like crash course it, but you are consistently learning and enjoying it, and making sure that it's actually a fun addition to your life. That, in my opinion, is the truest way to, we're going to call it, achieving fluency or achieving your language learning goals, if your goal is to be bilingual, trilingual, etc. It's totally possible.
Are you interested in becoming a global citizen and living a lifestyle by design in a country that aligns with you? If this is a lifestyle that you're seeking to create, we can help. Whether it be multiple residencies, citizenships, bank accounts, trust, or company formations, we operate in 30 plus of the most tax friendly jurisdictions around the globe to get you structured properly. Head to the link in the show notes to learn more and to get your global citizen journey underway today. Yeah, I totally agree. And I have been, on a personal note, I have been, my partner's mom does not speak any English. So it's been good for me to, listen and try to understand. But I find it,
Awesome.
in order to communicate, especially, I don't know about some other languages. And this is why I actually find Spanish a lot more difficult than Mandarin in a lot of ways when I was learning that, is because there's so many specific conjugations, and I believe French is the same. Not that I got
Hmm.
too
Hmm.
deep into French when I was in Canada, but there's so many specific conjugations where you really have to know like was in the past in order to make that sentence, but it's just like a three-letter word and it encompasses three words in English in this like one short word. And so I find it really difficult because for me, at least, it comes down to memorization, and I am not great at just sitting there, and this is what I did all throughout university. I would just sit there with a pen and paper and write a note and then stare
Hmm.
at it and then write it again and stare at it. And so I find, in order to really master a lot of these exceptions and rules, you have to figure out how you learn and then just go
Hmm.
about that. And so I have figured out that a better approach for me is to kind of learn it. I have a tutor, so we learn it. I definitely don't master things in an hour with him, but then I will try it and I will almost always make a mistake from it. But then when I make that mistake, that is how I actually learn because I've tried it, I've failed, and then it's like, okay, what's the right way to do it? Oh, this. Okay, now I
Mhm.
understand it more. Does that make sense?
Oh my God, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. You could do my job. This is, this is great. This is great stuff. I think you've got so much of it captured there, which is the I talk about this a lot. I've got this course called Crack the Grammar Code, which is kind of it's a bit nerdy. It's how to learn grammar or how I see learning grammar actually working. What you're talking about is, like it's grammar, not vocab, and you do have to learn them slightly differently. With vocab, the memorizing works much better. With grammar, because you are looking at not just memorizing a table and then reproducing the table in conversation. Can you imagine? That'd be so weird. Um, but actually knowing which bit to reach for and what it all is. So you're wanting to build all this essentially muscle memory. None of that really gets built from memorizing tables and endings and all that stuff. It's useful to have seen them before, but it doesn't solve the problem. Whereas what really goes a long, long way towards solving the problem, like you're describing, is having the tutor, having your uh, partner's mother to practice with, having real life situations to practice with, making the mistakes. Oh my God, the mistakes are the learning. The mistakes are not the fails. The mistakes are the learning, and then putting that puzzle piece together. And that's where you have the moment where you go, oh, that's what that is. And when you have that moment, that is that is a true learning moment. So to generate as many as possible as you can in your learning process is the way forward. And that means failing a little bit in terms of sounding perfect and correct.
Yes, yes. I love that you mentioned that. And I love that I mentioned that too, because just from trial and error, that's what I found. I've tried Duolingo, I've tried like all of the things, and I just find that is what works the best for me. So before moving on to the business
Hmm.
aspect of things,
Yeah.
are
I
there
mean, they
any
all work before people come for me. They all work, but like you say, they don't all work for everybody in the right kind of way. So they don't work for you right there. Duolingo probably worked a little bit.
exactly?
I'm not I'm not a huge fan either. For me, it's like, well, yeah, whatever. But some people swear by it. They're so passionate and will write me long emails. So just for the record, it all works. It all works.
Write you long emails. Yeah, I know the feeling. So before we move on to the entrepreneurship side, are there any other
Yeah.
tips, tricks, hacks that you find really help a lot of your students to get familiar and get speaking a language?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. It's okay. In terms of a tip, I would recommend get really clear, be really aware of your goal. Like what is it that you want to be doing with the language? It doesn't have to be in your entire life, but it does look different, and you will be needing different materials and different strategies, whether you want to pass an immigration test, talk to your partner's mother-in-law, live in a different country, build a different career, or just be conversational and enhance and enjoy and enrich your own life, right? So just get clear on that, get a feel for that. Yes, you may build a vision board. I actually recommend it. It's not a bad idea at all. That is kind of the first step I would recommend for people. And then get really specific. And I would recommend, if you don't have to, either get a tutor or get yourself a coach. With a coach, I went with my clients. I find I do like 2 sessions, and then people, they're up and running and they go. You don't have to work with somebody for ages and ages. It's just somebody who really knows how this works and can talk to you about your specific situation way better than if I gave you like 7 generic, like, look here and do this and do that kind of things. Listen to the Fluent Show. That's my podcast. that's my other tip. And in terms of hack, what I have been really into and working on quite a lot, and is a membership that I run. It's AI that it doesn't. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to fix. It's not going to be. You never need to practice and be embarrassed again. But I find it so much more exciting than I've ever found language learning apps. There is so much potential. So dig into that, look around. I've got a few blog articles and stuff. So come and investigate AI. It is a very interesting time to be playing with that.
Ooh, so interesting. Talk to me a little bit more about AI in language learning.
Well, AI chatbots, essentially, and AI tools, they're built on language, aren't they? They're built on large language models. And most people have never had that level of access to natural language that is just generated on the fly so flexibly, so spontaneously, so fast before, right? So we've just been handed the biggest tools, and there is so much cool stuff that you can do. So I work with I have like a business partner for this. I work with my friend Josh, and we in AI Language Club, what we do and what I would recommend as a student that you can do as well. So you don't have to come and join us, although of course you should, but is that we come up with specific ideas, specific practice ideas that you can do with AI, and that you can kind of then apply to it, right? So instead of just sitting down and going, hey, ChatGPT, practice French with me, having a conversation that gets boring that quick in, just in your target language, we kind of look at one deeper and we go, oh, how about if we did so one of my tutorials for April is I practiced with a tarot reading. So it was like, pretend to be a tarot reader, pull a card for me, let's describe the card. You can do really cool stuff with image generation in your target language. You can do really cool stuff. Like now you can actually talk to your AI tool and get pretty decent audio back. You can use the functionalities of the ones that go on the internet. So the Google thing is called Gemini, and then you've got Copilot, which is the Microsoft one. They're adding new skills all the time. They're already set up to work in hundreds of languages, and they're not always going to generate correct language and correct explanations. So you do have to be a bit careful. Like I said, they're not going to fix all your problems, but as a practice tool, as something to experiment with, as a versatile way of, say, generating a text in your target language that is exactly right for your level, it's exactly about something that you're interested in. Maybe telling it, I'm going to have a conversation, let's say, with my partner's mother, and I really want to tell her about, how we do this thing in Canada. Can you spit out some like 25 vocab items that you can actually then look at and prepare for that specific conversation? We have never had access to tools like this and resources that make it so fast and easy, where you don't even have to, I don't know, whip out a book or anything. I started language learning before I had internet. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to worry, like, I don't know what microphone means. I don't know what something means. You can just get yourself the little vocab list, the glossary, and get ready to go. So we have so many ideas. We play around with so many different ideas, and I really think it is a very exciting time for language learning.
So interesting. Okay, yeah. You've definitely convinced me that
Oh, yeah, come and check out the club. It's so cool.
yeah, that's really, really interesting. And you're so right, just within the last year, 2 years, less than 2 years even, there's been such huge changes and developments, and why can't those aid in languages as well? So, moving over to the entrepreneurship, business building side of things, first, I'm very
Mm.
curious. I want to ask you, for my own selfish purposes as well, what is the difference between having a language tutor and a language coach?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good question. Many tutors will cross over, especially the more experienced they are, because they've just seen so many students, and you sort of get a sense of um, how different students are. So the way I work as a language coach is generally like the way I work as a coach is I don't give a lot of guidelines and instructions. It's a lot of questions. There is a little bit more looking at your individual circumstances, like your resources that you have available, also mindset, maybe beliefs that you have about yourself, about learning, beliefs that you have about certain resources. we don't have to question them all, but it's really good to just kind of get a sense of who you are. And then when I'm doing coaching with people, I look more at their learning style. I look more at sort of the types of strategies that I think would benefit them the most. And then we together I co-create with a client a plan of suggestions and kind of something that will really give them a chance to fix the problem. There is always a little bit of mentoring in there because you can't, switch yourself entirely off as a subject matter expert, I guess. But that's very different to if you're coming to me for tutoring and you're booking me, say, for German tutoring, which I don't offer anymore, but did for many years. Then my job is to make sure that you understand German and you get better at German and to practice German with you. So that's really the difference. Coaching is more about enabling you as a language learner to be the most successful that you can be, right? So we're talking way more about how to learn. And that is so underestimated as something to talk about. Uh, It's really the thing that, you fix 5 little things and it'll serve you for life. Whereas with tutoring, it can be super, super useful. But sometimes as a student, it can also be the thing that you then rely on just as a accountability crutch. And then it doesn't challenge you enough. So for me, because because I noticed more and more with my students the ways that they all stood in their own way in the same ways, and I'm very interested in the psychology motivation aspect, and read up on that and worked on that. For me, that's how it started going into the language coaching side. It's rarer.
Yeah, it definitely is. I haven't heard of too many language coaches, but that is very interesting when you compare it with like a typical tutor. So I'm curious,
Mhm.
building your business, how that looked when you have, of course, you are one individual, I'm sure, with a team. You're not this huge multinational conglomerate, but there is now Duolingo and there's Preply and there's italki and there's all of these platforms. So what did it look like for you with this global competition to build out and carve out your own language learning entrepreneurship path?
Mm. So for me, I I started on a platform because when you're starting out, you're just like, oh yeah, just send me some clients. Just the same way that if you were a graphic designer or even a coach, you could list yourself on something like Fiverr, or what's the other one where you can hire people?
Upwork.
Oh, thank you very much. Right, you can just list yourself on there, and you obviously don't necessarily stand out, but it's how you get your first people. So it is a great way of just getting a sense of who you like to work with, what it is that you want to say to them, how you want to kind of put it all together. I was, when I started, I was already quite prolific with the blogging. So that's something that I did for many, many years. Just wrote all these blog articles, which boosted SEO. So I get a decent amount of traffic to the website, which really, really helps. But in terms of setting myself up as a person outside of those platforms, well, number one, I don't worry about the competition because I'm very much me, and I feel like I offer a unique experience. I offer a unique approach. And then over the years, I know with, say, German teaching, if you've done it for a while and you can see the results, you sort of have the sense of, you build your confidence so that you really start to feel the same way with every kind of business skill. You're like, you just know you're good. You know you're good at it, so that it becomes easier when somebody comes and approaches you and asks you to offer this to them. You can very confidently say, yes, that's what I'm going to do. So for me, I made my first online course. I used to make all these little videos on YouTube, just playing around and teaching French grammar, actually, uh, because that's what I wanted to teach. And then over time, I realized I've got so many videos that I've all put together. I've kind of built a curriculum. What would it take to make this into an online course? And that's when I made my first course. I think that's 2013. It's really a long time ago. That's when I sort of started building into my own products. And then over and then added the podcast, and I really could tell that with podcasting, people relate to you as the host. People relate to what you've got to say. And that was a great tool for me as I branched out more into, away from, oh, German tutor, this is really clear what you're getting, to this, what is a language coach? Why do I need this? Having a product that is a little bit more quirky and unique means, on the one hand, your price point for it will be different. It means, on the other hand, you've got to do more. You've got to be better at selling, explaining to people what's the point of this. No, this will really help you. Here's how this is going to help you. Here's who this is for. You're doing more of the educating for your audience. So over time, you just learn a lot more about the kind of conversation that you will have with your people. And I'm still pretty much a solo person. When you say you've probably got a team, I think the biggest team I had at at any point is probably when my husband helped with editing my podcast, and I had a VA, like a full, almost all the time VA. And I still have a content assistant, and I've got somebody doing graphics every now and then. But one of the beauties of having, an online business the way that I have is actually that you can really do a lot of it by yourself and still produce decent quality.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I
Like,
love
do I need a team of 20? No.
yeah, no, I love that perspective, and I also really like the perspective of you're not really like, the competition is not on the radar. You know it's there, but you know that why you are different, why you are unique, what you bring to the table that they do not have. And so you just kind of, let it fall to the sidelines and know that your people are going to find you. And I really like that perspective because there's competition in absolutely every industry these days. Like you will always have at least a few competitors, if not many more. So I think that's a really interesting perspective that more people need to look at. I think, we can get so focused on the competition and they're doing this and it's not worth it. And why would I even start a business if there's already these huge companies or whatever? But it's you that is bringing the business to light and to the table. And it's you why they are attracted to what you're doing.
Hmm. Very much agree with that. Very much agree with that. I mean, there's not really much. Oh, this is strange. Okay. On the one hand, there's not really much new that I guess you can add, right? In terms of a generic service. Like, you can go and find other people who will tell you how to learn languages. However, I know because I've thought, sometimes I've thought about selling some of my core courses and going, oh, I could just sell the intellectual property and be like, okay, now I have fewer that I need to market and somebody else has got a great asset and I've made some money. This is great. And then I think, no, because there's so me, there is so much of how I think in there and how I explain things that it feels strange. And it's partly because it's a personal brand and it's that type of business. But you're just not going to be able to buy my teaching elsewhere. You're going to be able to buy quality teaching elsewhere, but if you want my flavor of quality teaching, you have to buy it from me. It's just not something anybody else can generate.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that is the same with absolutely every single business out there. So,
Hmm.
to wrap up, is there anything that we have not touched on in terms of language learning or business building that you would like to bring to light in this conversation?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would say it really, in terms of the entrepreneurship aspect, it really is about that vision that you have for your business and whether you want to bring, there's this phrase, right, bringing your whole self to work. And for me, it seems to be almost impossible to not just be very, very me in all the work that I do. But I think that's really, we talked about with languages, how it's so important to think about what it is that you're learning your language for. And I think with business building, if I was to look at somebody who's newly building a business, that is kind of where I would really see the difference and ask the question, how much of yourself you want to bring to it and what your bigger vision is for it. And if you want to be that, I don't know, a stupid amount of zeros, having 50 people working for you, big agency, you don't have to ask yourself so much the personality questions, etc. You can differentiate on different factors, price, etc. I've chosen to differentiate on, personality, quality, and if somebody really likes me, that is the best experience they're going to have because we gel, but it's not the only way of working.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. Such an interesting conversation. Well, thank you for being here today. Where can people find you, your community, your courses, your memberships online?
Okay, so I am a bit, but this probably comes across. I'm a bit multi-passionate. So right, so I'm going to give you some URLs, but fluentlanguage.co.uk. So fluentlanguage, all one word, .co.uk is where you can find all my language work. If you want the AI language club, I guess you can just search for AI language club and it should be coming up. But there is a page on my website that just says everything, and it's right in there as well, where you can get all my courses, all my ideas, all my quirky little bits. My courses start at $9, and then different price ranges from there. So there should be something for you if you're into languages and trying something new and just experimenting. And for my business side, which is mentorship for solo business owners, that is kirstincable.com. So it's just my name.com.
You've just listened to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. If anything from this episode resonated with you, I would appreciate if you share this podcast on your socials. And of course, be sure to tag me. And don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me on this global citizen journey, and I'll see you in the next episode.